Today, two of America's most exciting, impressive and loved writers. She's known for writing one of Barack Obama's favourite novels when he was in office. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner. They're both here for Paris's celebration of American fiction, the Festival America. Lauren Groff and Michael Chabon, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. And I'm going to start by asking you to give me one word to describe America at this precise moment. Lauren.
Oh, disaster? Did I say that? Yeah.
Since she already took disaster, I'll say turbulent.
Turbulent. Mm-hmm. Lauren, when you were here last, you were talking about your third novel, Fates and Furies, and it was at the end of Barack Obama's presidency. You said your fellow writers and friends and artists around you were on fire because of Donald Trump, and it was their responsibility, or artists' responsibility, to push against what he stands for. In your new book, Florida, there are 11 stories. Many of the characters are suffering and in trouble. Is this your response to Donald Trump?
Well, most of these stories were written many years ago, but I do think that the collection as a whole came out as a very powerful rage response to what's happening to the world at large, not just in terms of politics, but also in terms of climate change and what's happening to women and what's happening to the vulnerable of the world. Yeah.
And Michael, you've been an outspoken critic of Trump. Last year, you and your wife, the author Ayelet Waldman, wrote an open letter calling on Jewish people to denounce Trump for his racism, white supremacism, intolerance and Jew hatred. Much of your work looks at the Jewish identity. If you could recommend one book for Donald Trump to read, which would it be?
I don't think he's actually capable of reading a book. I might have to try to come up with like a film he should watch or something, because I'm not sure. I mean, I would have to start with very simple, rudimentary text intended probably for kindergartners.
He definitely doesn't have Barack Obama's reading list.
No, he doesn't.
No.
I think seems quite proud of his illiteracy.
And as writers, both of you have experienced very early success. Your first novel, The Mysteries of Pittsburgh, was an instant bestseller. You actually wrote it at university, never really intending it to be published. Wonder Boys was made into a film starring Michael Douglas. Your third, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, won the Pulitzer Prize in 2001. And Lauren, last year, you were named by Granta magazine as one of the best of young American novelists of your generation. I wanted to ask you both, is there a common theme in American literature today?
I don't think so. I actually think that the common theme might be fragmentation in a certain way. The way that the technology is actually making it difficult for us to become a community.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think if you wanted to put a more positive spin on the word fragmentation, there is also a lot of diversity. There's a multiplicity of voices being represented in American fiction in a way that hasn't been the case for most of American fiction's history. And I think in the past 15, 20 years, we see writers from previously unrepresented or very underrepresented communities taking their place on the stage of American literature.
And one theme that you've both touched on is parenthood. In Florida, one of the first stories, Ghosts and Empties, follows a mother who roams her neighbourhood at night. Michael, your latest book in English is a collection of essays. It's called Pop's Fatherhood in Pieces, where you talk about being a parent to teenagers. And the book opens, though, with the advice that a great writer once gave you: don't have children, as each one will represent a novel you will never publish. You have 4 children, you have 2. Can great writers be great parents, or can great parents be great writers?
I mean, can anyone be a great parent? I'm not sure. But I mean, this is a perennial question for women. Women writers have been wrestling with the problem of trying to get their work done as artists while also getting their work done as mothers. It's a newer question for men, for male writers. I think the answer is in some way no. I don't think. I mean, I definitely have made compromises both as a father and as a writer. Some of them probably not that serious or grave, others that were more significant. Some I didn't really realize at the time were compromises. But I mean, it's still, even that being said, it's no reason not to, you know, if you are a writer, if you're an artist of any kind, and you also want to have children, it can be done. It just is never going to be as convenient or as easy as it might be for one who has no children.
Did becoming a parent change the way you write?
No. Well, so I think that with enough privilege, anyone can do anything they want to. And this is what we're addressing when we talk about the way that male artists in the past were able to be parents, but also not have to sort of succumb their identity to this fact of parenthood. So I do think, like, if you acknowledge the privilege and if you have enough privilege, you can be a great writer and have children at the same time, because you just outsource everything. And that sounds very cynical of me, but that's what has been happening in the history of literature.
Sure.
I didn't change my writing because I had the great privilege of marrying the man I married, who is a 60% parent. And from the beginning, we have an actual contract that says, this is what I have to do as a parent, and this is what you have to do. And so we had it sort of in writing from the beginning. And I do count that as part of my immense privilege in being both a parent and an artist.
And you've talked a lot about marriage, especially in your previous book, Fates and Furies. It's told by a husband's perspective, then from the wife's perspective. It shows just how much we can get each other wrong. Michael, your wife is a novelist, Ayelet Waldman. She's written about your marriage. She's written about parenting. When you first read these works, were they a surprise to you?
What she's written about our family and our marriage?
Did you think, this is not how I see it?
No, I'd never had that experience, because I think we're in constant communication about everything that's going on in our lives. And furthermore, if you know my wife, anyone who knows my wife knows that she's not one to really keep her feelings to herself or her thoughts or emotions to herself. So, when I've read what she's written about her feelings toward our kids or toward our marriage, it's always been in the nature of being amazed at how she found way to express in great writing things that had previously been presented to me as kind of much more inchoate emotions and reactions and feelings. And she's very eloquent and is able to sort of build a case for whatever point she's trying to make. And that's what tends to not surprise me, but impress me, is the way that something that is so often raw and in process then becomes something that's been thought about and digested.
In your writing, you're deeply respectful of women. Moonglow depicts middle-aged and elderly women in lustful ways, which is pretty wonderful. And in your book about fatherhood, you write about having to teach your older son about equality and about respect for women. This is quite surprising in male writing, isn't it?
It is, actually. Yes. Well, yeah. So I'm also raising 2 little boys, too. And that's a big question. How do you create young men who are actually going to be good men in the world at large? And I think this is a relatively new question that we're asking of the people around us. And we're asking of the men, the male writers, to actually address these issues, too. Michael's always been good at this. Since day one, he's been amazing at this.
Well, I mean,
he's on our side.
Thank you. I mean, the standard is different. I mean, there used to be a thing of you have to raise good men, but what we meant when we said that was something very different, I think, than what we mean or what we ought to mean when we say it now. And part of that definition has to include absolute fundamental respect for the humanity of women, which is ultimately what it amounts to. What's been lacking is still lacking. That it's, on the one hand, it's easy to do. It seems like it should be easy. On the other hand, every cultural message around boys and girls too is still, and so many retrograde messages are still so vivid in our culture, our society, that it's an uphill struggle.
And we have to combat it on the level of the archetype too, because a lot of the archetypes we're being fed, the cowboy archetype, the princess archetypes. These are really profoundly distressing and painful things that we need to fight against in art.
Yeah, and princesses are more present than ever.
I know.
They're everywhere.
You're both here for Festival America, but in lots of your work, especially the recent work, you've both written about experiences here in France, Fashion Week, going to Fashion Week with your son, and there's a French grandmother in Moonglow. And in your book, Florida, there's a mother who takes her sons to France to research Guy de Maupassant. Can you tell us about a French writer who influences you?
Well, so Guy de Maupassant was the first French writer who influenced me. I was here for a year in between high school and college, and I thought I spoke French. I didn't speak French. I was miserable. I was in lycée with 14-year-olds. And I was 18, and I skipped school a lot and went and read books because that's the way that I moderate the world. And Guy de Maupassant's short story collection, Contes de la Bécasse, was the first book I read where I actually felt like I understood something about the world. And he showed me what a short story could do, because previously I only knew O. Henry, and he's terrible. So Guy de Maupassant, but then I realized what a terrible human being he was, and revolted against the cult of Guy.
The French writer that I go back to the most now, the one that I return to, and I struggle to be able to read in French, but I still manage to do it, is Roland Barthes. And I just love his almost everything, even things that are really beyond my comprehension in French or in English. The sound of his sentences and the wit and there's something just so deeply appealing about the mind behind the writing that you feel like you're in the company of a friend when you're reading his work. And so he's really my favorite now, I'd say.
Okay, Michael and Lauren, thank you so much for joining us
you.
here on France 24. Michael Chabon's Moonglow has just been translated into French. His book Pop's Fatherhood in Pieces is out in English, and Lauren's short story collection Florida is out in English now. Both of you are at the Festival America that's on until the 23rd of September in Vincennes, just outside Paris. Thanks for joining us. Remember our website. We're also on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this. Thank you.